I'm Eric Anderson. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, officials are hitting the gas on an improvement plan for San Diego's ambulance service. The experts expected to help rural Metro meet its on-time expectations.
Buyer beware, the people who are trying to buy the American dream with the purchase of their first home. I'm Amitha Sharma. What everyone needs to know before they put money down. Plus, it's an emotion that leaves many feeling isolated. The quiet struggle shared for the first time by a San Diego writer.
Once you get out of the workforce, you're no longer an important citizen anymore. And that's just not true, because we age well for a long time. Many of us do.
Keeping up with the growing population of aging neighbors, the San Diego seniors who are not waiting for lawmakers to play catch-up. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening and thanks for joining us. Customs and Border Patrol is responding to a report tonight that says the agency is holding off on a body camera plan. In a statement, the agency says the draft report picked up by the media was a dated version and does not reflect the agency's deliberations over the past months. The statement comes in response to published reports that hinted that the agency was rejecting a plan to use body cameras. The Associated Press says a year-long review rejected body cameras because of cost and other reasons. Those include cameras distracting agents on the job and cameras failing to work in hot, dusty conditions. There will be no federal charges filed in the taser death of a Mexican immigrant at the San Ysidro port of entry. Today, the Justice Department deciding not to prosecute the Border Patrol agents linked to that incident. As KPBS Fronteras reporter Jean Guerrero reports, family members are not giving up on this case.
Anastacio Hernandez Rojas suffered a fatal heart attack in 2010 after he was repeatedly shot with a taser at the border crossing. The incident went viral after it was caught on camera and shared on YouTube. In the video, about a dozen agents surround Hernandez and beat him as he cries for help. A federal grand jury investigation was opened in 2012. Federal prosecutors say they couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the agents willfully deprived Hernandez of a constitutional right. I spoke with Hernandez's widow, Maria Puga, who was still trying to absorb the news.
We all
know that they're guilty. There are videos and witnesses, but it seems there wasn't enough for the government. So our whole family is very disillusioned and frustrated with this ruling.
She says the family is not going to give up and that she is already in touch with the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights to try to get justice at an international level. Jean Guerrero, KPBS News.
A California congressman is launching an attempt to ban the breeding of killer whales in captivity. Congressman Adam Schiff introduced the Orca Responsibility and Care Advancement Act today. He says the bill would make sure that orcas now in aquatic parks like SeaWorld are the last. The bill also bans taking whales from the wild. SeaWorld San Diego, meanwhile, already took a hit last month when the California Coastal Commission approved an expansion of the park's killer whale exhibit under the condition that whale breeding would stop there. SeaWorld is challenging the commission's ruling, and this week SeaWorld hinted it plans to boost attendance with a new attraction. They did not give specifics, but the park's CEO says the attraction could be funded with cash that was earmarked for the tank expansion. More details on the new exhibit are expected to be released on Monday. Following up on San Diego's troubled ambulance service, the new operators say they are moving quickly to solve rural Metro's on-time issues. KPBS reporter Steve Walsh has details on an improvement plan.
At the end of their first full week after acquiring the company that ran San Diego's ambulance service, American Medical Resources says they're bringing in experts from the company to assess why rural Metro was not meeting the requirement that they be on scene within 12 minutes at least 90% of the time. Step one was to bring in an additional 5 ambulances to serve the city.
The current status was that the response time compliance numbers were not where they needed to be. And in an effort to start making immediate improvements, that was the decision that was made. And then on the longer term, analyzing the deployment model, the system status plan, and all the other things that go into making a system like this function.
Rural Metro has been under pressure since the city fined the company back in October.
They failed in every area of the entire city, every community. They showed up not on time, so there clearly is some systemic problems there, and what I've called for is for us to be prepared to terminate that contract if this happens one more time.
AMR plans to submit a correction plan to the city. Rice says AMR is meeting the terms of its contracts with other communities it serves in San Diego County, including Chula Vista, La Mesa, and El Cajon. The company does have its work cut out for it. With 90,000 911 calls, San Diego is nearly triple the size of all of its other local operations combined. Steve Walsh, KPBS News.
San Diego State University broke ground on a new research building today. This 5-story structure is being designed as a laboratory for collaboration. Graduate Affairs Dean Stephen Welter says the facility will further the school's goal to become one of the nation's top 50 research universities.
This kind of building is a tremendous investment in that initiative. Without these kinds of facilities, we can't really attract the kinds of graduate students or faculty that we think we can achieve. I also think it allows us to position ourselves differently, to try to occupy a different research niche by being a little bit more collaborative, both physically and intellectually.
The 85,000 square foot structure will house 17 labs. There's also classroom space and lounging areas that encourage people to work together. The building should be complete in early 2018. San Diego County will soon get more than $55 million to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions thanks to the state's cap and trade system. California businesses pay to help offset their pollution impacts. The money is used for projects to help soften the state's carbon footprint, and nearly $2 million are going to be used to plant trees in San Diego's underserved neighborhoods.
In this time of drought, trees can actually help us save water on the large scale. They can help, if they're placed in the right place, they can help capture stormwater runoff and replenish our groundwater source.
Planting could begin as soon as this December. Capital punishment might be getting new life in California. State officials are proposing a new single-drug lethal injection protocol. Now, a nationwide shortage of execution drugs put California executions on hold over the past 10 years. The single-drug proposal now faces a 2-month comment period. The debate could continue next year as well, when voters are widely expected to consider a ballot measure on the death penalty. President Barack Obama has rejected a controversial pipeline proposal. The president says the Keystone XL project will not serve the nation's interest. The decision comes after 7 years of federal review and public debate. The president says approving the plan would send the wrong message on climate change.
America is now a global leader when it comes to taking serious action to fight climate change. And frankly, approving this project would have undercut that global leadership.
The pipeline was proposed by the energy company TransCanada. It would have stretched over 1,000 miles from Canada all the way to Texas. Prominent philosopher Cornel West tackles the tension between young people and police in urban neighborhoods. It's the topic of his speaking engagement in Southeast San Diego next month. KPBS reporter Megan Burke says the focal point is a controversial gang conspiracy law used to jail several men from that neighborhood.
West agreed to speak at Lincoln High School after learning San Diego prosecutors used Penal Code 182.5 to charge 33 men, including rapper Tiny Do, for a string of shootings. The prosecutors argued the men materially benefited from the shootings, despite many of them being far away, even behind bars when the incidents occurred. San Diego District Attorney Bonnie Dumanis recently told KPBS in response to community feedback she'll stop using 182.5. Aaron Harvey was one of the defendants and says Dumanis's announcement doesn't mean the conversation should end.
Was 182.5 right or wrong? If right, I think that needs to be explained why. And if wrong, there needs to be something done and public named apologies.
Now, 2 judges threw out the charges earlier this year. Megan Burks, KPBS News.
San Diego home prices are rising faster than the national average. That's a result of a last month's report by the Case-Shiller Index. Amitha Sharma, meanwhile, tells us the process of buying a home is complicated, and both buyers and sellers need to be aware of what's at stake.
What is it you look for when purchasing a home? Is it a good location, price? What if you bought a home and found out later the roof was put on by a non-licensed contractor or a murder took place inside the home? For a look at details that must be disclosed by a seller, I'm joined by Tanya Hertz with San Diego State's College of Business Administration. She's also a licensed real estate broker. Tanya, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Why is disclosure so important both for the buyer and the seller?
So that's interesting that you say that. It is important for both parties. For the seller, it protects them if in the event that something might come up later. So, for example, the roof example that you said, if the seller were to not to explain to the buyer that the roof was installed by an unlicensed person, they could potentially be sued later down the road. And for the buyer, of course, it is extremely important because they're going into the transaction with their eyes wide open. They know what they're getting into. And there are many, many disclosures that we look at here in California that are required and important parts of the process.
Well, let's talk about those things. What are some of the things that sellers must disclose in California?
So there are a lot of things that sellers need to disclose in California. So anything that anything that might be material to the purchase, anything that might affect the value or the desirability of the property need to be disclosed. And there are some interesting things that need to be disclosed. If there was a death on the property, for example, in the last 3 years, that needs to be disclosed. If there's been any repairs to the property, that needs to be disclosed. Something as simple as if somebody smoked at the property, whether or not that was indoors or outdoors, we need to let the buyers know so they can make an informed decision before purchasing.
So what if you have a bad neighbor, an unruly neighbor? Does disclosure go past the property line?
That's an interesting question. And some of the disclosures here in California have been expanded beyond the property itself to encompass the neighborhood. And let's say an unruly, as you said, an unruly neighbor. That's something that you need to disclose, a barking dog. So even if it's not on the property, if it's something that can affect the buyer's enjoyment of the property, it's something we need to let them know about.
But what if there's been a heinous crime committed in the neighborhood, in the community? Does a buyer need to know about that?
Absolutely, absolutely. You can think about, many of us remember the Heaven's Gate cult. This was years ago, the suicides of, I think, 39 people out in Rancho Santa Fe. That's something that stays with the property much longer than 3 years. So that goes beyond the 3-year disclosure period. As long as it stays in the public perception, that's something that we need to let the buyers know. So anything that the seller knows, anything that the seller is aware of at the time of the sale, they need to let the buyer know to protect themselves and to protect the buyers.
What if the seller believes his property or her property is haunted? What then?
Okay, that's
a lot of people who think that their homes are haunted.
Absolutely, that's a very interesting question. It actually comes up more often than you would think, and we actually do have to disclose that. So while I might not believe in ghosts, and many sellers don't believe in ghosts, there are buyers that do. So it doesn't matter whether or not it's material to the seller. If it might be material to the buyer, we need to let them know. And it may affect the purchase price of the home. Some people might even enjoy a haunted house, the macabre. Yeah, it might even be a selling feature. Who knows?
But what are the consequences if you don't reveal that your house is haunted or you believe that your house is haunted?
Sure. So if it's something that we can prove that the seller knew prior to selling the house or at the time of the sale of the house, the buyers could potentially go after them in court. So there are some real consequences, monetary consequences, for not disclosing what you know about a house.
Now, I understand that there's a new code on the books dealing with the drought. Tell me about that.
So starting on January 1st of 2014, anytime a seller makes an alteration to a property, to either the bathroom or the kitchen, they need to put in low flow water fixtures. So, and this is any repair to a bathroom or a kitchen, whether or not they were intending to even look at the fixtures. And this is more than just a disclosure, because not only do they have to disclose whether or not the property has water fixtures, low flow water fixtures as in the past, they now actually have to correct this, which is different from a lot of the other disclosures.
Tanya Hertz, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
The San Diego Zoo welcomed half a dozen female southern white rhinos today. The rhinos are part of an ambitious effort to help save the endangered northern white rhino. The new rhinos will be quarantined as they adapt to their new home. There are just 4 northern white rhinos left in the world, one of them in San Diego. San Diego seniors are not celebrating the 50th birthday of the Older Americans Act. That's because the law that pays for elderly services hasn't been reauthorized since 2011. KPBS reporter Megan Burke says some San Diego retirees are taking matters into their own hands.
So what are we playing today?
Mexican train.
Okay.
It's like dominoes.
Have you played this board game?
Twice a month, older residents in a hilly residential section of City Heights meet to play board games. They each take turns hosting. Everyone is responsible for bringing snacks to share.
Help yourself to any food.
81-year-old Evie Kossauer moved to Azalea Park 12 years ago. She says the casual gatherings are aimed at becoming something a bit more formal.
When I got first involved within the first year or two here, I asked where's the senior center? And people would tell me, it's here, it's there, it's wherever. There was none in City Heights.
Kossauer says a senior center is critical for keeping older residents active and connecting them to needed services. She tried to campaign for a city-funded center a few years ago, but hit a lot of roadblocks. So she and her neighbors are forming a sort of roving senior center. Nationally, they're called villages. Senior neighbors band together to create membership organizations. They host events and classes, help each other around the house, and check in on neighbors who become sick. There are already villages in Del Cerro, Del Mar, and Scripps Ranch. Kossauer wants the Azalea Park and Fairmont Village neighborhoods of City Heights to be next.
So this is the kind of thing where let's get this going in our neighborhood, close to where we live, and then it can also be supportive when people need the support, such as somebody falls down and so they're having to stay home for a number of weeks while they're recuperating. They need some help shopping. People who are still traveling, it's nice to be able to get a ride to the airport.
The group is in the early stages, but 78-year-old Agnes Conrad says she already sees the value of working together. She began living alone after her husband died from congestive heart failure last year.
Even though I was able to help my husband through his final illness, and I felt that we were very fortunate, there are many things I've learned since working with this organization that I wish I had known.
Things like a medicine delivery service or a hotline for senior services. But Conrad says the more information she and Kossauer uncover, the more service gaps they find.
We wanted to buy here because it's close to everything in San Diego. It's very easy to get around. Of course now, almost 50 years later, it's not easy to get around if you don't have a car.
We've made good strides in the area of transportation, but there's a long way to go.
Ellen Schmieding heads Aging and Independence Services at the county. She says there are a lot of good programs for elderly San Diegans, but they're more a patchwork than seamless. She says part of the problem is that federal funding for the aging has flatlined. Congress hasn't adjusted the Older Americans Act for inflation since 2011. Currently, funding is at about $175 per person annually.
I think that as of now, the realization that more money needs to be invested given the rise in population just hasn't hit our decision makers really hard.
Kossauer says failing to support seniors is a missed opportunity.
From my perspective, it's a lot of knowledge and expertise and energy that's being missed to somehow come back into the community by not having us organized well, by not having us in the position to be able to do that. It's kind of always been easy, Once you get out of the workforce, you're no longer an important citizen anymore. And that's just not true, because we age well for a long time, many of us do. We may have to spend some time keeping ourselves well, but that's okay, It doesn't mean we haven't anything to give back. We can't be useful.
Kosauer says she hopes the City Heights Village and others in San Diego can help set the pace for aging services while lawmakers count dollars and cents.
It's kind of like it's up to us to start to do something and then to try to pressure the other agencies, or at least let them know what we're doing and see if they can't help us.
The group's next step is to elect a board. Megan Burks, KPBS News.
Brian Myers of the Media Arts Center helped produce that report. The Diary of a Diva explores the quiet struggle of its San Diego Reader columnist. Amita Sharma explains what prompted her to share her experience with depression.
Despair and hopelessness are all too familiar emotions for Americans. Depression affects 1 in 10 people. San Diego Reader staff writer Barbarella Focus opened up about her experience with depression in her latest Diary of a Diva column. Barbarella, thank you for coming on the program. What made you decide to write about depression now?
I had an acquaintance, Kurt Cunningham, who was an advocate for suicide prevention, recently ended his life. And he was adamant about ending the stigma of depression and making sure that people knew where the resources were. And I did this in honor of him because, having been a columnist for 11 years, I never wrote about it before.
And why didn't you write about it before?
Well, okay. I've written about anxiety and neuroses and things like that, things that are kind of okay, that you can poke fun at. But this just, it seemed like a failure in some way, you know, like a not fun thing to talk about. And it was embarrassing.
So I want to get back to that, but I want to talk about Kurt's passing. How has his death affected how you view your own struggle with depression?
It scared me, honestly. It scared me because of somebody like Kurt, who has all of the resources and gives all the resources to other people, could get to a point where he saw no hope. I worried about myself.
And, you know, there have been a lot of studies that actually could fuel worry. I mean, these studies say that antidepressants and talk therapy are actually not as effective as originally thought. What has been your experience with these remedies?
They were not that effective. I have tried therapy, and I was on an antidepressant for 2 years, and I went off of it maybe like 4 years ago. So, I mean, it didn't really do much for me. The thing that does something for me is connecting with other people.
But you also write that sometimes it's very difficult to share your depression with friends because they're eager to cheer you up, and they talk about all the things that you have going for you, and then that makes you feel like, gosh, you're ungrateful. What advice would you give to people who aren't depressed, who haven't had that experience? What advice would you give them in being good friends to people who do suffer from depression?
That's great, and it's so great because I think that that's what people don't really understand. Our desire is to make you feel better. Everybody wants to fix it, but really the most helpful thing is to just be there. Let us go through it. Let us experience it. Know it's okay, because when you try to fix it, we feel like we're failing that too, like we're not good enough and we're failing at being happy. But just to be there and to say, you can talk to me, I'm here, no judgment, that's the best, really.
When you're in the middle of it, and you say that talking to other people, connecting with other people helps, but when you're in the middle of it, do you see that there's going to be an end? Like, do you see light at the end of a tunnel? I hate to use that cliche, but...
Well, but it's there for a reason. It makes sense, right? No. It feels like it's never going to be better. And when things are okay, I can't imagine having felt that way. You know, I start the story, today I feel fine. You know, you wake up and you feel okay. I'm like, wow, how did I get that dark? How did I think ever that things could never be better? And I don't know, you know, the magic of it. That's what the doctors study, you know, but it really doesn't. You know, on some logic part of your brain that things are okay, but you can't, the emotions can't access that.
And you also say that you can't logic your way out of it. And there are, as you say, all these other emotions that come with it, frustration at yourself that you're feeling this way, anger that you're feeling this way. Have you developed any kind of path out of those feelings?
No. And that's the saddest thing, because there really isn't that I have found. Now, inadvertently, by telling my husband and telling my sister, that, you know, it helps, and it helped me out, but no.
And very quickly, you say that you've gotten quite a response on Facebook from you sharing your story about depression. What has stood out for you the most on what people are saying?
Just that so many of them are experiencing the same thing, and that so many of them don't tell the people who are closest to them. And when they open to me, when I say, hey, I'm going through this, it's an opening for them to communicate and connect. And so that's been overwhelming. And that was one of the inadvertent paths that helped me out of it.
Barbara Focus, thanks so much for coming on the
program. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I'm Hari Srinivasan. On the next News Hour, Mark Shields and David Brooks analyze the week's news. That's Friday on the PBS NewsHour.
San Diego's Chicano Park in Barrio Logan looks a bit more like $1 million today. That's because it recently got more than $1 million in improvements. The upgrades include new playgrounds, a skate park, and adult fitness equipment. Warm fall weather in store for San Diego this weekend. It's going to be a mix of sun and clouds out by the beaches. High temperatures in the 70s and 60s. You'll see that cool down on Monday. Overnight lows in the 50s. 60s and 40s up in the mountain. Inland temperatures in the 70s and 60s, as you see there. Overnight lows in the 50s. Comfortable sleeping weather up there. Up in the mountains, though, temperatures a little cooler, as you would expect. Overnight lows down to the 40s and mid-30s even on Monday. And then out in the deserts, we look at temperatures that are going to be up near 80 degrees. Overnight lows comfortable around 55. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back here on Monday. Have a great weekend.